Welcome to Beyond the Gloves, Episode 6. I'm Billy Strange, and along with me, as always, my co-host, John Sable. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, Billy, on our Change of Plans, Episode 6 of Beyond the Gloves.
Yeah, whoops, as you notice, we do not have an extra person with us. Tony had to cancel and reschedule, so
Yes.
Unfortunately we don't have him, and if you were looking for him, he's not here.
Yes, and for those who don't know, that is Tony Gardner of iRacing. We announced on the live show on Wednesday we would have him on, but unfortunately, as you guys probably know, these developers are busy and something came up, so we will try to catch Tony another time.
Yeah, so what have you been driving lately? What have you been turning the wheel with?
So, speaking of Season 2, I think pretty sure that's the only thing I've really driven since last week, and did a Part 2 preview that you guys probably saw on the new Season 2 release for iRacing. Hopefully, unlike some people, you didn't get sick watching it.
Whoops.
Yeah, future reference for capturing things in VR that, sometimes maybe that on-screen capture and motion simulator, maybe it moves around too much. Even though some people said they loved it, so, you can't win, but definitely want to be inclusive. So I guess in the future I'll turn off the motion simulator when doing VR capture. But yeah, mostly drove a fair amount of that, jumping between different cars and track combos, and yeah, I think that was pretty much it. How about you?
I did the same. I did our Part 1 in that, where I took the super late model around the bull ring. That should be interesting for the short track guys. And then also I ran a bunch of different GT cars doing their new tire model that they've put on there, which I really enjoy. So I did a lot of that. Also did the GT 500, the Nissan from R Factor 2 at NOLA, which NOLA's a great track. I was very surprised at how much I actually enjoyed that track. And what else have I done? Oh, I did which you should see before this actually, did the race room with what did I drive? The brand new BMW M6 GT3. It's actually not released yet on Onderstorp. So both of those pieces in race room are not as yet to be released, at least. Gotta quit rhyming. And yeah, the GT car feels a little stiff. It is a work in progress still, but overall, it's a good addition to the GT3 series, and Onderstorp is cool. It's kind of tough to pass with the GT3 cars.
Yeah, did look like it's a fairly tight track for such a big car.
Yeah, but fun nonetheless. With touring cars and the smaller size cars, I think it'd be a blast, because I really actually enjoy the layout. It's got some nice, really good banking. Kind of fun to rip around those corners.
Yeah, no, for Race Room, I really can't wait for when the next WTCC pack comes out, and I really want to drive that Volvo. And yeah, once that comes out, then I think that's going to be really good for these few new Swedish tracks that have, well, one's came out so far, I believe, or two. I can't remember where we're at now. But in total, there'll be three, and I think...
one is released so far, I think?
Yeah, I think that sounds right. But they all kind of run together, the announcements and the releases. But yeah, once they're all out, I think they'll work really well with the touring cars.
I agree. They should be pretty good. If you're not familiar with Beyond the Gloves, it is a weekly podcast dedicated to sim racing, where John and I both pick a topic, take a deep dive, and then discuss amongst each other and with you, the audience. So, we'd like you to be a part of the conversation. If you'd like to do so, go ahead and leave a comment below in the YouTube video, or you can also go to isrtv.com forums and leave a comment there in the dedicated Beyond the Gloves section. Also, we are available on your favorite podcast services. And something I haven't mentioned before is, if you'd like to leave a review, it does help us on the search engine that they use. So, just kind of puts us in front of more ear holes, and then YouTube in front of more eyeballs. All right. I think I'm going to start with my topic. Let me take a look at how I worded this here. So I'm curious to know what people think of in modern day Sims having a career mode, a traditional game type of career mode where there's some sort of progression or unlocking system. And then you could argue that there could be a story element to it. I mean, there have been not necessarily sim racing related titles, but auto racing related titles like Codemasters, what is it? Pro Driver, or I think, yeah, the Toka Pro Race Driver 2 had had a story element to it. In fact, the first one, Pro Race Driver, the way it starts out is kind of dark. So maybe not necessarily a story mode, although I wouldn't be opposed to that. But in the offline play, so we're kind of excluding iRacing and anything that has online play to it. If it has an online side or a single race mode, we're not talking about that. We're talking more of the Assetto courses that have tried to put in some sort of career mode. Project Cars, even Gran Turismo series as of late. They all kind of seem stale when they do include one, or you could look at ones that have an offline mode like R Factor 2, which really doesn't have one at all. Is there a place, and I'll kick it to you, John, is there a place in modern sim racing for something like that, a career type of structure where you unlock things or maybe earn money to buy cars, the typical so-called career mode?
I think there could be it. I actually think that something like that would be, if it's engaging, I think it would be pretty popular. I think there's people out there who would be interested in it. I don't know if I myself am super interested in it, but I do think there is a market there. But like you said, when you told me about this topic, I thought about it and I'm like, like you mentioned, Assetto Corsa has kind of a career mode type deal, and I applaud them for the attempt. I just don't know if it's ever fully, been realized as something that people really get excited for. It seems like something that people kind of dabble in. I've dabbled with it on the console side when those console releases came out, but it hasn't really caught my attention. I thought about it, and I don't really have I don't know if I really have a good solution to it. Like, I don't know what it would take for a sim racing title to then go and have an engaging career mode. So, yeah, that's kind of tough. I don't know. Do you have any ideas on it, Billy?
Well, I think I'm not totally sure because I'm curious if this is like a generational thing because I'm 37 and what I've kind of noticed is from Darren kind of seems to be at the forefront of the era where maybe a little past me where we grew up at a very young age with video games. And I think there's something to be said for us wanting that still video game part of it, where we still. I think a sim that would embrace both would be the best of both worlds, where it could have a single race or a championship mode that's full simulation with pit stops and weather change and all that stuff to make you feel like this is the most immersive experience you can have, where you can pick any car that is in the sim. But on the other hand, I tend to make those sims throwaway titles where I just bounce in and out, whatever I just feel like driving, which on one hand can be very appealing to a lot of people, but for myself, I tend not to be as invested in the title. So I would point to like a Sebastian Loeb Rally Evo. That had a pretty good single-player career mode because you owned the cars and you got a sense of progression that you were starting out with lower tier cars and then working your way up the ladder. I still would like to see it go a little deeper than that. But something like that in my generation, I seem to notice people really clamor for, where I feel like you go a little further past the people that grew up in the, you know, late 70s, early to mid 80s, maybe even into the early 90s with video games. I think the further you get down the line, the more it seems like they don't really care about that kind of gameplay. They're either heavily invested in multiplayer because they were kind of at the forefront of it, or they just want to pick their favorite car and just drive around the track. Like my dad, he loves playing these titles, but he could care less about a progression per se. I mean, he likes to, like Project Cars. He's a really big fan of Project Cars. And he likes the career mode, but only for the fact that he can pick whatever he wants to drive. And then it gives him a championship. Well, you can accomplish the same thing with a championship mode. Where I kind of like maybe something that doesn't necessarily force me, but I want to say it was either Forza 4, I think, or was it Forza 5? I can't remember which one, but there was one of those that guided you. It kind of saw your tendencies, and then it could guide you along the way to the different road to the end of the career mode, per se. So I don't know. Do you think it's a generational thing? Like, what era you grew up with that kind of changes your idea on if it should come with a career mode, or to your point, what makes a good career mode?
I think it could be to some degree. You know, I think of myself, I'm 29, and probably my highest level of video game, just kind of general video game playing, was probably high school, college, and especially in college, you know, it was very popular to be playing the Call of Duties and Halos and stuff like that, and playing online. And I mean, we're talking. What are we talking? We're talking 2006, 7, 8, 9, that kind of time frame in there. And yeah, back then it seemed like a lot of the games had kind of stripped away the campaigns and the single player, or they gotten very short. And it really was about the online play. So yeah, it's been a long time since I've really sat down and done a campaign. Now, what you were talking about, there's definitely some points there that I do agree with. You know, Project Cars, I remember when it came out, their selling point on their single player campaign career mode, what have you, was that, yeah, you can jump into any level, but, you know, any kind of cars, whatever you want. But I'm with you. I like to see progression. I've always enjoyed that, you know, back when, I mean, Gran Turismo 4 is probably the last one where I really went and stepped through, and I do like owning your own cars and stepping through. And you mentioned Sebastian Loeb Rally, and I agree that does do a pretty decent job of stepping you through a career mode and buying your own cars and stuff like that. But yeah, I think you're on to something that I still do like the progression of unlocking faster cars and moving up in speed and new tracks and stuff like that. But something that does let you do something a little more guided, where you can maybe lean more towards open wheel cars, or lean more towards oval versus road course racing, or you know, or more GT, or get more towards endurance prototype racing. You know, if it did have some branches that you could select, I think that would go a long way.
Sure. Yeah, for something that is not a dedicated title, which we don't see much of anymore. Everything is kind of a conglomeration of all these different genres within the racing industry, whether it be touring cars, GT, open wheel, stock cars, that it makes it difficult, I think, to do that, because you almost feel like perhaps you're missing out on something. But the Gran Turismo series did it, or at least they used to do it in a way. And I mean, they still do it to a degree. I just kind of felt like my ownership level kind of deteriorated over time. It became more of a grind, instead of like I was really excited with this one car and I kept it for as long as I could until it quit winning races and then moved to the next one, which was still a grind, but I just felt it was implemented a different way.
Yeah. You know, things that I wrote down a couple things here, and they're not necessarily career mode. 'Cause like I said, I don't really have a good answer of how to implement it and really get us to a little more on the deep end of racing games, into the sim racing land on board. But I think there's little things that can be done that could really help the experience, though, and make it kind of feel a little more like a career mode. So A couple things I jotted down here is um, F1 2016. I think with their championship mode, they've done a really excellent job where you can do a race weekend and really walk through the steps of what you would do on a team with tire selection and going through the kind of the checklist at practice for that race weekend. I think that really adds a different element there to just a straight up, car, track, setup, race that we're into on most sim racing titles. Something else I noted that isn't doing it as well. I always like it when if you win a race or have a good finish or something, maybe you get to do see like a podium celebration or you get a little something, a little nugget. Maybe there could be some kind of like point system or some kind of award system that would be fun. And because that's something that when I think about winning a race and then nothing happens, I think of Assetto Corsa, where you win a race and then it's a hard cut and you're sitting in the pits. I'm always kind of like, I want something to happen here more than me just being back in the pits. And to be fair, Assetto Corsa, even though they're kind of the most abrupt, like hard cut, other titles you don't really get anything. A lot of stuff nothing really happens. So I did see in Project Cars 2 that they're going to have, if you win a race, it's going to be some kind of like post-race celebration thing. So I think little elements like that are really neat.
I would agree. That going back to the Richard Burns rally video that I did, having just that little thing where I hit a photographer, and then that medevac chopper came down, and the little gurney-like bed, stretcher thing came down to get him. That was hysterical. That was great.
That was.
I love stuff like that. It doesn't have to be all the time and littered throughout everything, but I noticed that, as I did it in my own time, if I didn't finish on the podium or I didn't win, I don't remember which one it was, or maybe it was I didn't advance. But I remember myself and my co-driver, I think, standing to the side, like shaking their head in like shame and disgust. I mean, those kind of little touches are funny, and I think bring a character and some sort of life to the particular title that you're playing. I know that I think GT did it with some of it was like stage to stage or point to point in like GT5, or maybe it was GT6, I don't remember, but you got to see like the car and like a banner, and I want to say there was a crowd around the car, and that stuff's nice, but it doesn't feel as connected as something that you did in the game. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess what kind of brought this topic about was last night my dad, we were at work, and my dad asked me, is there anything more to Assetto Corsa's career mode? He's playing on the PC. He decided to try the career mode. And he's like, is there anything more to their career mode? And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I want to get to the GT3 stuff. What do I need to do? I said, well, you have to keep driving the lower stuff. He's like, okay, so there's no way I can bypass that? And I'm like, not that I'm aware, but if you go to that tile, I think it tells you what ones you need to complete in order to get to the GT3 races. He's like, and is there anything to it? Like, do I get to buy a car, or what do I do? I said, well, I think they hand you a car to run, and then you do it. He's like, huh, that's weird. And I kind of thought about it. I'm like, well, yeah, to a degree. On one point, he's talking about how he doesn't want to go through the process, but he wouldn't mind going through the process if he had some sort of ownership when he got to the GT3 category. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it just gives you, there's like 3 or 4 different ones, but I think it just gives you a car to run. You don't get to pick the car.
Yeah, no, correct. It's here's your car and off you go. Yeah, there's not really an ownership dynamic there in the Assetto Corsa career mode.
Yeah, so it got me thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, you know what, you're right. And then I was trying to kind of go through, and I'm like, okay, well, why does he like Project Cars so much? Well, it's because he feels like he has a sense of ownership, some sort of build up like his own narrative in his head about I started with the touring cars or the GT4 cars, and then I worked my way into a GT3 ride, and then into prototypes. And I think he likes that idea. And I just found, I don't know, I just found it interesting. And then I kind of reflected on myself, and I thought of all the different career modes that I've played and what ones I like and what ones I don't. And I think as long as there is some sort of single player championship slash mode that you can play where you can pick whatever car, for those people that want to do that, let them do that. But then give those of us that like to play a career mode that kind of option. And I think there's a psychology to it with the unlocking and earning stuff. I mean, there is something to be said for the Candy Crushes of the world, where it gives you that sense, that tingly sense of, ooh, I did something.
Yeah.
And there's a psychology behind that. There's a reason why those games are super popular, if you want to call them games. That it gives you a sense of reward and progression and success. And I always felt that when I ran a few races in GT and then got the money to get the latest turbo or tires or something like that. Or bought a new car for a new series, and like I would scroll through the garages and go, I want that car. I've got to figure out how to get that car. Or like one of my favorite ones was either I want to say it was GT2 or GT3. I think it was GT2 that made it so where I wanted to keep replaying the series with a different car, because there was 4 cars at random you could get at the end, and it would cycle, and they would all be in shadows. And then you would try to hit the X button or the cross button at a certain time to stop the wheel from the thing from going through highlighting the 4 cars, and you would get a car at random. And there was there was always one car that was a little harder to get than the other 3. And I would just rerun the race with a different car, so I had something else to drive to try to get that car. I liked that. To me, that was fun because I had a sense of there was a challenge to it. Not only the challenge of the race and winning, and we want to talk about what makes people nervous. Like, those were some of my most intense moments in playing any sort of racing title, was like being on the verge of not winning the championship so that I couldn't get one of those stupid cars at the end.
Yeah, yeah. No, I feel you. I mean, I feel the same way when I played, especially Gran Turismo 4 was probably my heaviest in a career mode. I really felt ownership of my cars, and I didn't switch over cars very quickly. I got a car and I ran it for, as you said earlier, as long as I could. And yeah, it was your baby. And yeah, I do think that is an important element, and maybe one that could be implemented into a career type mode. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would like to see it in there, and then I'm going to hit on 2 more points real quick. Something else to kind of, maybe a different way of doing career mode was, I think it was NASCAR 2005? Maybe it was 2004. One of those, or maybe it was both. I could be saying the wrong year. It's one of the NASCAR EA titles, let's put it that way, on like the PS2 Xbox era, where you started in either a lower series and then worked your way up through sponsorships, and then I think one of them, if I'm remembering correctly, you started in a lower cup team and you could build your own team with sponsors, or you could wait till somebody else retired and then jump in that car. I thought that was a really neat mechanic to be able to, I want to say at that time there was like John Andretti would retire and a few of these other guys, and I always said, the hell with my team, I'm going to jump in, one of those cars, because it was like having a real cup ride and getting to run the 43 car or whatever it was. I don't exactly remember all the drivers, and it was one of those titles, but I thought that was a really cool mechanic for a career mode as well.
Yeah, no, I remember playing those games back then on the PS2 or whatever. And yeah, no, I did that. I felt like one of those EA Sports titles, I know they had it one year where they had like the Truck Series and the now Xfinity Series and then the Cup Series.
They had one with the Whelen Modifieds.
Yes, that's what I was getting at. I thought they had one with the Modifieds. And
yes.
And yeah, you could start just work your way from the very bottom. And yeah, no, I enjoyed doing doing that myself. One thing that I was also thinking of that'd be, I think, kind of fun, that this isn't necessarily a full up career mode, but it kind of gets in some of these different elements we've been talking about, is we need to see a sim go and implement what was in the GT series? Is it the licenses, the little things where you got a rating of bronze, silver, or gold?
Yes, yes.
I'd like to see something like that in a racing title, where you have to go and you have to run through like a cone course, or do a stopping distance thing, or I don't know, put some like jumps on the front stretch at Watkins Glen or something. You know, just kind of just something kind of goofy, where you're going for a time, and then maybe you have a leaderboard, and it just kind of becomes a fun little distraction there to kind of cut some of the tension that's always there. Make it so you can't can't modify the cars. You just here's your car, fix that up, go out there and do something fun and see how you rank.
You know what? I'm the opposite. I don't want that. I don't know why. I just felt like whenever those things, I guess I don't mind them if it wasn't required to progress.
Yeah.
So maybe if it was like an unlockable that was an option. But I always kind of felt, I think Forza did this. I know the GT series did this at one point. And then there was I had just thought of another title that did this, and now I can't think of it off the top of my head, where you had to do these. Oh, the other title that I was thinking of was Project Cars, but Project Cars was more of an all-inclusive. It kind of did that throughout. You had a kudos system that would reward you for drifting and doing clean passes and this kind of stuff, but they would have time trials and what's the deal that you do in the parking lot with the cone? Autocross.
Yep.
They had autocross-like stuff. Forza has that. If I'm not mistaken, the GT series has that in the later titles. I don't mind those as a distraction, but I don't want them necessarily as part of my career mode to require me to progress. And the license thing I like. But I knew a lot of people that started out with GT or GT2 as their first introduction into a racing title, and I would get phone calls, or I'd go over to their house, and they would be so frustrated because they could not pass one of the tests to get their license.
Yeah.
And trying to help them. I mean, those were pretty brutal. I like the idea, but I think it was GTR2 that did it, where it seemed a little more reasonable, and you unlocked something. I remember the first GT, you unlocked something if you got all gold for every test within a license, and my brother and I played that for days trying to get like I think it was the 400R was one of them, and all these, what would end up being, I think, like the Solstice or something like that. There was some concept car from Chrysler, I think. All these different cars to unlock. I mean, that was fun. I just don't think they need to be as brutal.
Yeah.
Some of them were pretty difficult.
Yeah, that's something. The two downfalls of that in the GT series were you had to do it to move on. Like it was a must, and that the balancing of all the different events were out of whack. Some events were super easy to get a gold, and then others were impossible. Or near impossible. So it's like. Yeah, I think if it was like its own standalone type, almost like mini game inside the sim that you could go do, and like I said, there's a leaderboard, so it's almost more like maybe you do fall into like a bronze, silver, gold category, but then inside of that you can battle it out, and maybe there could be little perks to that, I don't know, little prizes, competitions, I don't know, but I think something like that as a standalone thing would be kind of fun.
I like that idea. I would be down for trying something like that as a standalone kind of piece of the career mode. That would be cool. And then the other question, the last point or question that I'm going to bring about is, do you think that this could be a console versus PC mentality to having a career mode? In other words, would PC sim racers be less receptive to this idea versus a console player, or do you think it's kind of across the board, there's going to be some sort of uniformity to the idea of a career mode?
Yeah, I do think there is a little bit of a mindset hurdle there between console and PC. There is definitely, for as much as there's something that is PC Master Race, just kind of in general PC gaming, then you get to sim racing, and there's that, to a different, I don't know, degree. So, yeah, I do think there would be some mindsets to get over. But, if you do something right and it's entertaining, I think you can get people on board. They can see other people are enjoying it, whether it's watching our show or forums or what have you. I think get people interested. I just think to some degree it just hasn't been fully realized on the sim front. It's been kind of dabbled in. The titles that are sim titles, but then also want to do a strong push on the consoles, like Project Cars and a set of courses and stuff like that. They've gone and they've worked on having something of a single player career mode there, because on the consoles you're expected to have one. You just can't show up without one, where you don't have that, let's call it for lack of a better word, stigma on the PC. So but I think if something would become fully realized, whether it's a full-blown career mode, stepping through cars, ownership like we've been talking about, maybe going through different pathways, or just kind of like a side fun thing like I was talking about, where you go and take some jumps or run through some cones or work on stopping on the X or whatever. I think if something's done right, it could take off, whether it's console or PC.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be a good way to implement some sort of a career mode with leaderboards and stuff like that. I think that would be pretty cool. I also maybe would like even to see some sort of combination of the two, where you have these offline races that could be turned into an online race if you choose so, if there's somebody in that same lobby, or that alerts you to that same lobby that populates the rest of the field with AI cars, but goes toward a career mode that gives you credits or advances you somehow in your selected series. So I think you're right. There's no one right way to do it, but if somebody did hit on something, I think universally people would really enjoy it and it would be widely accepted. And again, we're not talking about multiplayer. That's a whole different aspect. I don't expect there to be any type of system like that in a multiplayer focused title or on a multiplayer side of the game. So we're excluding iRacing and some of the more multiplayer focused titles out there. But for those that have an offline mode, I think you're right. Having some sort of system that the majority of offline players would enjoy, I think would be universal, and maybe it would spur others to see that and innovate on a career mode like that.
Yep, no, I agree. I think a lot of it just kind of comes down to resources and maybe in perception, because you do got to kind of take a bold stance that's like, hey, we're going to go and do this, and there's probably, if I had to guess, knowing the sim racing community,
I know where you're going.
And anytime you try to do something that's different, there can be a bit of a backlash, and
there's a little bit of pushback or blowback from it, and that's the hard thing, and that's where I was just curious, where does everybody stand on something like this? Because, like I said, I feel like from my generation, it would be a welcome feature, but I kind of feel like a generation before me and a generation after me doesn't really care. So it would be interesting to see if you could get those other two on board with that career idea.
Yes, it would be. So maybe we'll find out sometime, or not. We'll see.
I wouldn't mind trying or even helping somebody develop something like that. I think it would be really fun and really cool to try to tap into something. So yeah, we'll leave it there. I'd really like to know everybody's thoughts. So once again, as I stutter, leave your comment down below or hit us up on the forums at isrtv.com. Let us know what you think about having a career mode in offline play in a sim racing related title. And then I'll kick it to you, John. What's your topic?
So my topic this week, I originally was going to do something else, and then I was like, I don't want to complain, because do enough complaining, critiquing, and that's not
hard.
fair.
it's hard not to complain. Complaining is easier than praising something, really.
You're right. No, it is. It is. That's for sure. Yeah, I totally agree. But anyway, with that said, I do want to kind of throw some praise. It's not really at individual game or whatever, but I want to talk about your favorite sim racing win. So I'll start off, and for me, my favorite sim racing win would have to be on iRacing. I want to say it's been so long now. That's the bad thing. You look back at like what's your favorite moment, you're like, oh, that was like, let's see, it was 2011.
And-
So
Whoa.
that was 6 years ago. So apparently for 6 years I've just been miserable. No, I've had some other good moments in there. You know, some things that came to mind was definitely some of the endurance racing, like an iRacing. I mean, the first like 24-hour race they ran, we finished. Well, we were going to finish second until we crashed with like 20 minutes to go. And even though that was a bad part of that experience, it was still, you know, really cool overall experience. And I've had a handful other wins here and there, whether it's iRacing or maybe some tough offline races against AI. But I think my favorite win was 2011 in iRacing at the time, I believe it was the nationwide car at Watkins Glen. So it was essentially now it's known as the K&N car in iRacing, but it's back when they had the old, more aerodynamic bodywork. And what made it my favorite win was that it was like a crazy hard race, and not only was it a crazy hard race, it was also like a decent split. Like it was one of those deals where anytime back then I was running the Oval Series and iRacing pretty much weekly, and anytime I see a road course come up on the schedule, I kind of like circled that and be like, okay, I need to get in there and practice early. So I remember like the weekend before it was the week to be running at Watkins Glen, I went and I did. I started testing there. And working on a setup, and was really trying to get like on the ball early in the week and race early in the week. Because normally back then I would race like at the end of the week on the weekends when most people were out there racing, and when I didn't have, let's see, at the time work when I wasn't working, the 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job. So I put my focus in the previous week to try to develop a setup, and I felt like I had a decent chance on a road course, being a decent road course racer versus a lot of guys who normally do the ovals, and then you had to be worried about the road course ringers that would then show up when the stock cars would go to the road courses. So anyway, I got the time to go and work on a setup, which, you know, as we've talked about some of you before, you know, Billy, you say how you like to jump around different things. For me, I like to get into a car and track combo and focus on it, and you know, spend some time there and really get a lot of laps in. And so I was able to do that, work on a setup, and then I think like one of the first qualifying sessions, a week to open on Monday, went in there, qualified, got a pretty good lap down, and then I think I ran this race on like maybe it was like a Tuesday night, so still early in the week, and there was a split, and I was able to get into the top split. And then I think I started the race from like 5th place or top 4 or something like that. And essentially I was able just to get through the first couple laps, nose clean. There was a lot of carnage. And then for the rest of the race, which these races were a pretty long race, we had to make a pit stop about the halfway point, or because you wouldn't make it on fuel. Me and this other guy just had this epic back and forth battle. And, you know, it was just like we were on each other the whole race, and he was ahead of me for a while. Then I got past him not long before that pit stop halfway through the race. And this was probably like a 40-lap race at Watkins Glen, which is a good number of laps, even on the short course. But yeah, you know, we just had like a really great close race. And then like coming out of the pits, he was right back on my bumper, and I held him off for like 5 laps, and then eventually he spun out through, I think he like lost in the S's or something, with only like with like, I don't know, probably 8 laps to go or something like that. And then I was able to, you know, cruise to pretty much a an easy win at that point because we kind of separated ourselves from the rest of the field. So even though it wasn't necessarily a nail biter at the end, and it wasn't, it was mostly just me and another guy. It was still just that intensity level, which is what I really like in sim racing, and just really the competition side. Like that's just really what I go for, and I was just really happy that that week that I was able to go and put the time in. I felt prepared, get into a run against the higher level guys, which I would normally, I was normally kind of on the edge at that point with my racing. And if I got into a higher level race, I would be happy to finish in the top 10 or be really happy with the top 5. But then to go out there and convert that into a win against racing against a guy who was really good. I wish I could remember the name now. It's been so many years. That for me was kind of like my favorite sim racing moment. And those type of moments that I still really strive to get to, which unfortunately with the current gig, or inside sim race, and we jump around so much, it gets kind of tough to do that kind of level of preparation effort that I do enjoy to do. So that was my favorite sim racing related win. Billy, what's yours?
So I don't have necessarily one. I have experiences that I really enjoy that I thought were pretty good about the level of competition. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly go over through some that I was thinking of as you were, when you brought up this topic. The first one that comes to memory is there was a game called Super Sprint on the NES. These are all racing related, but not technically sim related. But there was a game called Super Sprint, and I remember my brother and I playing that for hours. And we get so close, and the goal was to get to like level 99. And it just kept throwing ever more increasingly ridiculous things like tornadoes and stuff on the track. It was really ridiculous. But I remember at one point, my brother and I were like at level 98. And when you played two-player, it was a little easier because you had more chances to continue. But we were both out of continues, and we missed transferring. And my brother was so, he's going to get mad at me for saying this, but he got so mad he yanked the cart out of the NES. I mean, he was probably like 6 or 7, and he's younger than me. And he rips the cart out and starts punching the cart. Like he's holding the cart with one hand and he's punching the cart. And we were both like just beside ourselves because we almost made it. And then like 2 days later, we finally beat the game. But that's a fun moment to remember. And then on the Super Nintendo, there was one called F1 Rock. And the idea was you were this beginner F1 team. I think it was Flamingo, if I remember right. And it used Mode 7 graphics. And the idea was to build yourself up to be one of the top tier F1 teams. So what we would do is my brother, my dad, and I, I think it was only a single player game. We would rotate races and see how far we could get before we either ran out of money or we made it to the top and won a championship. And that was really fun because it's almost like doing what everybody does now with the endurance racing, but we were relying on each other to hold up their end of the deal so that we didn't lose money or whatever and not continue. So that we did that for, I remember, one summer. We'd go play outside, and then in the evening, that's all we did. And it was so much fun as a kid. Another good memory I have is the original Gran Turismo. My brother and I sat for hours. You mentioned those licensing tests from earlier. We spent hours trying to get the gold. And there was this, I want to say it was at, what is that one? It's one of the tracks. I think it's when in one of the license tests, you had to use one of the Nissan Skylines. And just the way to get the gold in that was so incredibly difficult. We spent days on that. Thank goodness for memory cards then. But we spent days on that trying to get that one. So I think that license is what got us that 400R. And we tried and we tried and we tried. Oh, man, I'm not kidding. We spent a good summer, a chunk of that summer, trying to get that license, and that was really fun. But it was really intense because you would just be 200ths of a second off, or a few thousandths off, and God, you just wanted to go scream into a pillow because you were so distraught about not getting it. And then GT2, we did one where they had, I think, the bottom of Pikes Peak, and my brother, my dad, and I would trade off racing going up that bottom part of Pikes Peak with the Escudo, trying to beat each other's time, and that was really fun. That was a good memory. Not to belabor the point anymore, but there was we did Gran Turismo 3 when that came out. I was working at a place that I had a pretty good group of warehouse people, and we ended up, everybody got a PS2, and then they had those link hubs that you could use, and you could link the PS2 to them, so we all had these small CRT TVs, and we would play 6-player Gran Turismo 3. And that brought about some really intense, pretty intense racing. That was fun. Yeah, I had some races in Forza. I was going to go into a couple other these ones, but I don't need to. But the last one, the most recent one is a few years ago when I tried iRacing to begin with, and I did a street stock race around Charlotte. And I started kind of similar to you. I swear I started around midway to maybe the front portion of the field, and I think this is the rookie. I think it's what you do in your rookie or your D license, whatever it is. And I made some moves because people got all squirrely, and I get up into second, and this guy and I ran side by side, almost door to door, for the entire race with everybody behind us 2x2. So we had the whole field running, and it was so cool because I tried to keep my momentum up. I'd drive into the turn, and then he'd have the low line, and he'd get back up underneath me, and I think it was netcode. We ended up touching with 2 laps to go in turn 2, and I spun out, and I tried to keep it away from everybody, so I hit the fence. I think we might have collected a couple cars, but I didn't care because I had so much fun trying to race and stay right next to that guy so I could have a shot at the win. I don't know. It was a good race. It was pretty fun. So those are just, I like this topic because it all of a sudden it brought about a flood of memories, all the really fun things, and almost stressful, but stressful in a good way.
Yeah, I think that is the common thread. Even when you were talking there, I thought about some more things. And some of them are wins, some of them weren't. I got a win in iRacing in the GT3 in the McLaren. Let's see, I was living in Kansas then, so this must have been end of 2013, and I won at Bathurst, which I've talked about plenty of times on the show how much I love Bathurst. Nice. And that was just I won the mountain. It was that was a big deal, especially GT3 cars go pretty quick around there, and just surviving is difficult. So I was proud of that. Something I've only said iRacing things. I remember back when Forza Motorsport 6 came out, which I say back when it was end of fall
back in the day.
Yeah, fall 2015. But one of the races, I think I actually have this race on YouTube, or maybe it was when I was trying to get this race film. But I ran the IndyCar at Brazil, their Sao Paulo fantasy track, and I ran on like Ultimate AI or Unbeatable, whatever. I think it's Unbeatable.
Yeah, it's on the channel. I remember that one.
Yeah, and that was intense. That was such an intense. I think I ended up finishing second. I don't think I won that race, but it was just those AI cars are all over you, and that track, and an Indy car, you're flying over top of curbs you shouldn't be flying over, and all sorts of stuff, and it's just it was really white knuckles. So I think there's a common thread here is that the more intense it is, and then if you're finally able to then get over the hump and get that license or win a race or get a good finish, whatever, it's in yes, that accomplishment. I think that really adds up to the experiences that we enjoy. Frustrating at the time maybe to some degree, but if you can go and achieve it, it's the best.
Yeah, I remember the track now that my brother and I were doing. It was Trial Mountain, if I'm not mistaken. And That was, I believe it was with the Skyline. That's what it was. You triggered it when you started talking about. You said something in there that triggered the name of the track. So, yeah, I think that's part of it, right? I remember Darren and I had a conversation about the intensity of online racing, and my argument was it didn't necessarily need to be. Not that he was arguing for it, but my point to him was that I didn't feel it was necessary to have online to be an intense situation. I think the environment that you end up playing in makes it an intense situation. If you're just running a race just to run a race where you can hit restart and then there's no consequence, or you're not gaining anything from it, then yeah, I can see his point. He's making a valid argument. But like I said, some of my most memorable moments are from both scenarios. I've had them. I play a lot online with Dirt 2. Had some epic races with like the trophy trucks and stuff on there. It was just awesome. And I did the same thing with Forza Motorsport 2. They had like a structured mode on there, and I had some fantastic races on there in the multiplayer. But I also, like I just went over, had equally intense and awesome experiences offline. So I think you're right. I think it's the like you said, that theme of intensity, that value, that there's some sort of intrinsic value to you that makes it memorable and an enjoyable experience.
Yes, yes. So, yeah, so that was cool. No, it's cool to hear your experiences and get to share mine, and hopefully you guys in the comment section, whether on YouTube or over on the forums, will go and maybe you guys can leave some of maybe your experiences that were your best wins, or maybe just even intense racing that you really enjoyed from over the years. So
yeah, yes, please do. I actually would really enjoy reading those. I think those would be fun.
Yeah, that would be fun to share a few of those on the next show. So so with that said, Billy, do we have anything that we want to share from post last week's show?
So on our last episode, that's episode 5, where we had Rubbins Racing and about the AI in games and sim titles, Spatial Dragon is referring to the Rubbins Racing part, but he kind of goes more into a little bit of a different aspect of that, where he says on the PS3 and GT5 there was a time where we had the very best online racing, fun, fair, and lots of friends that showed up every night. We raced the 125 single speed karts. They were so fun, and the racing so close. We always had a full room, and then several guys begging us to kick someone and let them in. I have tried to duplicate that experience on PC and PS4 with no joy. Now there are so many games and platforms that it is impossible to replicate. That said, I still enjoy trying to find that experience again. So this one's an interesting topic because it kind of bridges between other topics we've also touched on. So a fractured system in multiplayer, and then this Rubbins Racing, but more of like how to find a great online experience. It's an interesting take in how he can't seem to replicate. Not that I'm saying he's not. I'm just saying that for his personal taste, he just can't seem to find that.
Yeah, I mean it can be tough. Sometimes you just kind of hit on a magic combination of people, and you get the right folks that can keep showing up every night, like he was saying. That it just really works out there. But yeah, I mean, like you said, there could be multiple causations there. It's just maybe maybe people are spread thin trying out different stuff. If it's then being spread thin with different cars and all these different simulations that you can run, or in this case, karts. And then if you do have that kind of core group that you can find, then you can you can do a little more Rubbins racing. I feel like, because then you can somewhat handle consequences in between each other, or how each other races, so when you kind of leaning on people versus complete strangers that you just all of a sudden you're racing them online. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's there is a lot of dynamics working there, and it's kind of too bad he hasn't been able to find that same or similar experience since then.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think sometimes that's what makes us feel nostalgic for a game or a sim, is that experience that we had that we can't seem to replicate anymore.
Sure.
Yep. Let's see. Next one from Frank. Personally, whether it is sim racing, Madden, or Battlefield, I avoid multiplayer like the plague. I feel like that sometimes. I like to play a game by myself against the AI or against another person that is sitting next to me. And this is interesting because, again, we're kind of bridging episodes here where he's talking about the AI from last episode, but then he also kind of taps into what we just talked about and that I touched on was racing, doing these races with people in the same room as you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's an experience. I mean, and that might be even something that's more generational than anything. You know, the two-player split screen experience. You know, so many games in general these days don't offer split screen. Now, that's something that I did that WRC6 video previous week. Something they mentioned there, like they have a split screen mode. So if you want to go and have two people playing at the same time, you can go and do that. And it's like, oh, you know, it's become such a, where for the longest time that was just the norm. You know,
Yeah.
you would have that,
Yeah.
and I played plenty of games, you know, Mario Kart or Crash Team or even up to the EA Sports NASCAR titles. You know, there was split screen mode, and me and a friend would go and race against each other.
Yep.
And yeah, it's not just the way with now online is. It's a rarer thing, and you know, if you grew up on it, you can. It's easy to feel nostalgic about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple problems. I think it's generational, and I also think that, especially the console side, is where you're going to typically do more split screen. I know there's some PC games that you can do that with, but as far as racing titles go, that was mainly a console staple. And I think with the horsepower of the current generation, and even maybe last generation, it's not possible because of the fidelity that you lose and the horsepower it takes to have a split screen experience anymore. I mean, I think the latest Gears didn't have split screen, if I remember right. Halo was the same way, and those had been traditionally split screen games in the last generation. And some of my, again, we go back to some of my favorite experiences where my brother and I think it was Alan Sir Jr.'s Turbo Racing on the NES. We did that split screen. Boy, I mean, we played that for hours and years even because we enjoyed doing the two-player deal so much. I think that was the one. Watch, it could be wrong, and that's wrong game. But then you mentioned the Super Mario Kart. I mean, my brother and I did that. Oh, jeez. Holy crap. We did that so much, it was ridiculous. And then NASCAR, I think it was the one with the modifieds in it. My stepson was 5 or 6, maybe 6 or 7, and and we were not sim racing at all at this point. He loved going backwards on the track, but he thought it was so funny. He thought it was so hilarious, and we did that split screen, and that's just something we shared together. So I get the point. All these things are like somewhat related to each other, and it's funny to hear like the different experiences people have and like what triggers a memory or what people long for nostalgically. And I think you're right. I think it's that part of it is that generational thing of mainly it's probably my generation of gamers that kind of miss that experience.
You know, that brings up something. If anyone wants to do a like we were talking about earlier, like a side little fun thing, even if it is like on a multiplayer game, like that doesn't work anyway. But anyway, if you want to do like a fun thing, me and my brother used to do the same thing with split screen in the NASCAR races where he didn't care, and he would go and drive backwards at Daytona, and I'd be in the pack, and the game was for me to survive
Yep,
him.
that's exactly what we did.
Coming through the pack, and I love
That's funny.
I would love that to be like a side game where you can go and you can be that car and be like, how many cars can you take out driving backwards around the track?
Did you ever play? This is not racing related, but it was Burnout. Gosh, I think I have it. Somebody's going to correct me, and so I'm not going to remember what title it is. But they had a crash mode in there, where you had these different scenarios where there was traffic, going across, and then you would try to jump the car into the traffic and wipe out as many cars and cause as many explosions as you could. It was so much fun. It was awesome. Okay, and the last one we're going to do here is this is a small one, but I thought it was pretty funny. Sim Racer 223. Billy, how much time do you spend each week rearranging the game shelf behind you? OCD much, LOL. Like I said to the comment, I like Easter eggs, so I usually try to be somewhat topical with the things I display behind me, and sometimes you might have to hunt for what I'm referencing, but I always like to throw things in there like that. I think it's fun.
The funny thing is, after I saw that comment, I had to go back and look at the video, and I was like, oh, okay, I see it.
So sometimes they're a little more obvious, sometimes they're a little more obscure. And that's where I think we're going to end episode 6, unless you got anything else, John.
Nope. I think, again, another week, we've covered it all.
Cover everything. There's nothing left in the universe.
Exactly.
I think that's just proves how good we are.
Yes.
That was a joke. All right. Well, again, thanks for watching. This is Beyond the Gloves episode 6. For John Sable and for Billy Strange, I'm pointing at myself because John can't see it. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll catch you in the next episode.